the last time I went to a Roman Catholic Mass was,
Mhm.
it was a while ago, it was way over a year ago. I could not stomach listening to the name of Francis
Yeah, yeah,
in
and the
the
Eucharistic prayer. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
just couldn't. I just said, I can't sit here. I can't pretend to be okay with the pedophile enabler. Mm,
Well, go
Can't do
ahead.
it. Can't do it.
Mhm.
Just can't. As a survivor, I can't do it. And just as somebody with a conscience, I can't do it.
So, yeah, I would be lying to you if I said I didn't flinch at least once every time I go to mass. And then part of me, like, I get mad at myself about that. Like, okay, oh, come on, but then I'm like, but then the other part of me is like, but it's true. It's, and so, I mean, what does it mean? I mean, gosh, I don't know what it means, Joseph. I don't know what it means. I mean,
God bless you, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. And it is my special honor to have as my guest, Kale Zelden. And I pulled this like mini bio, Kale, off
Mhm.
the 1 Peter 5.
Oh, great. Yeah, yeah.
So it's interesting. You were born in New Orleans.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
was my grandfather.
Oh, really?
Yeah, my dad's father.
On the Chiambra side.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they're from Sicily,
Hmm.
but I don't know. I did try to do some genealogy.
Hmm. Hmm.
They came over. There's a lot of Italians in New Orleans,
There really
and
are, and people don't know that. But there's a very large Italian population. In fact, there's a very big, and this is maybe sort of part of the ethnic group sort of vying for relevance. There's a big St. Joseph's altar tradition in New Orleans, as well as you might imagine a St. Patrick's Day tradition that happens kind of right in the middle of Lent, which happens just a few weeks after Mardi Gras has happened. So it's an interesting hodgepodge of groups there. But yeah, the Italians in New Orleans, it's a big tradition.
yeah. So um, he was born there, and then when he was a little child, his mother died. So the
Mhm.
father, so that would have been my great grandfather, was left with a bunch of kids,
Okay.
alone. And I think somebody from in the family, as is Italian families,
Mhm.
those days, especially all the marriages were arranged. So they
Sure.
called, I don't think they called, they probably wrote from Sicily and said, there's a woman here who would marry
Yeah.
you
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
help you raise all these kids. So he moved back. They moved
Oh.
back to
Oh.
Sicily, and then my dad was born in Sicily. So
Oh, wow. So no, so it's kind of a rebound effect. That's interesting. Wow, that's
and then
great.
my dad came back, not to New Orleans. He was in New York, and then he came out to California.
Got it. Okay. Okay.
It's kind of weird.
And you were born and you grew up in California, correct?
Yeah, in San
Yeah.
Francisco.
Got
Yeah.
it. Got it.
So
Yeah.
there was a bunch of Italians out in San Francisco at that time, especially like in the
Mhm.
North Beach area.
Okay.
So I don't know, somebody knew somebody in an Italian bakery that needed
Right.
somebody to work, and that's how my
Sure.
dad ended up out here.
Got it. Got it.
It's kind of weird.
Yeah, I love those
And
stories actually.
now so you got your BA in literature from Thomas More College
Mhm.
and your MA in English from Louisiana State University.
That's
Wow.
right.
And it says here that I want to know what you were doing. It says you worked in Hollywood. What were you
I
doing there?
did. Yeah. So I lived there for almost exactly 5 years, so sort of June to June for 5 years from I think 2001 through 2005. And so I went out there. I wanted to write, so I was trying to break into um,
Screenwriter?
screenwriting. Yeah, I was trying to break into screenwriting. I was really looking to get into television writing and especially sitcom writing. But this was in the immediate aftermath. Two things sort of happened in Hollywood that was perhaps not fortuitous for me at any rate. The Seinfeld and Friends had just kind of shuttered. And in the wake of it was a rush of a lot of reality television programming. And so the networks loved this new thing because television is expensive. At least they understood it to be expensive because you needed, 10, 12 writers in a room. This is all kinds of overhead that, well, if we could get rid of the screenwriters and just film a bunch of stuff and let the editors do it, then we'll do it. And so that was sort of part of it. It's one of those things. It's you move out to Hollywood and you just meet an incredible amount of smart and intelligent people, really talented. It's such a magnet, as you might imagine, for all the allure, for Hollywood fame and all of that. But so I met a ton of great people. I loved it out there. But one of the reasons I had taught before I went out to Hollywood. And so while I'm in Hollywood, I'm working, trying to write my own screenplays, but I'm also a creative producer. I'm working with other writers and breaking stories and that kind of thing. And then I was also a programmer for the largest student film festival called the Angelus Awards. It's no longer in operation, but it was a great thing, a great outfit, and with an award ceremony at the DGA, and it was great stuff. So all of it, of course, became grist for the mill, So, but then I got married, and with a baby on the way, it's sort of one of those things like, do I really want to do this? Do I want to hustle in this way? And at the time, my fiance, now my wife, she was teaching at a small little independent school in Pasadena. And so we lived in South Pasadena. I was kind of going back and forth into Hollywood. I actually lived on the train line, so I could take the Gold Line into the Red Line. And my office was just about not even a quarter of a mile away from the Kodak Theater and the Mann Chinese Theater. So it's a cool little spot in Hollywood. But at any rate, baby on the way, and an old buddy of mine called me out of the blue and said, "Hey, Kale, we'd gone to Thomas More College together." And he said, "Hey, look, I've been working at Portsmouth Abbey, this boarding school. What do you think? I think we've got an opening. I think you should put your hat in the ring." I'm like, "No, thank you. I'm great. I'm fine. I'm doing this Hollywood thing." But at any rate, I sort of got to know that I met the headmaster, and I was like, "Oh, this is kind of a cool thing. They have this really amazing great books program." So it was attractive enough. So my wife and I, we moved our brand new baby and us across the country, and we've been here ever since. So
Wow.
yeah, so it's quite a change. And I had taught before I'd moved out to Hollywood. And part of the thing that had spurred me to go out to Hollywood is that I was working at a high school, actually the high school I graduated from in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. And the brother who was the principal or the vice principal at the time was like, "Look, Kale, we really like you. It would be great, if you do, but you're gonna have to get your teaching credential." And I was sort of like, "Yeah, no, I'm good." And I was single at the time, and I wasn't quite ready to hunker down, and become a lifelong teacher. And so I decided, you know what, I've always wanted to go out to Hollywood, so I did. I just went out, and it was good. It was great. I'm really glad I did it. It was a great experience.
Yeah, reality shows are a cheap way of entertaining because they don't have to pay actors.
Yeah,
Because
no, it's
most of
exactly
the,
right.
somebody floated the idea, and I regret I didn't do it. The idea for a reality show for me, it sounded so cool at the time, but then I was getting bad advice. It was about they would follow, because I do street ministry, so they were going to follow me just on the streets of Hollywood and West Hollywood or wherever.
Yeah, of course.
And me talk to different people on the street, either hookers or
yeah, well, it's all right there, of course.
Yeah, and I was like, and then I didn't do it. And
did you ever live in West LA?
I lived in West Hollywood for a while.
Okay. Do you remember? Did you ever go to St. Victor's in Los Angeles?
I wasn't Catholic at that time.
Okay.
I know exactly where it is. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Monsignor Parnassus. He was really fantastic. I mean, he was probably the most old school trad priest in the Diocese of Los Angeles, and he was at a church right in the middle of West Hollywood. So I would go a lot of times that we would go there, and he was fantastic.
Did you ever? Since you lived in Pasadena, did you ever go to the Carmelites in Alhambra there?
Yeah, yeah, of course, yeah. In fact, when we moved to South Pass, after we were living in Burbank first, and then we moved out to South Pasadena. That's where we went to mass, was at Alhambra.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they have a parish, and the sisters are there. You know, the
Yep.
full habit. Yeah,
Oh yeah, the whole thing. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and
it's a great spot.
it is. It's a nice
Mhm.
community there. I've
Mhm.
gone on retreat
Yeah.
there. So now are you a high school or
Yeah, yeah. I teach high school. I'm here at the boarding school, and I am the head of the humanities department, and which is it's a great books course
is it a
basically.
boys' school?
It's co-ed, boys and girls. It was originally, of course, a boys' school, founded in 1926, I think, and then it was a little bit late, and it's an interesting story. You know, it was in part it was formed. Started as a way of trying to get Catholic kids into elite colleges, because at the time, the way to get into an elite college is you had to go to Groton or St. Paul's or Exeter or Andover, or, you know, one of the sort of the super, you know, the super boarding schools, the kind of the original ones, which were all, I think, either Episcopalian or Presbyterian. And so they had, for the longest time, if you were Catholic, you simply couldn't go. And then for a time, there was sort of the one Jew, one Catholic rule that they could say they had, you know, maybe the original sort of diversity quotas, but eventually that opened up, you know, post-war. And then a lot of the schools went co-ed in the late 70s, early 80s. We didn't go co-ed until 91. So that was you know, and look, in part, it's a working monastery here. You know, there you know, some monks originally who own it, we still own it, run it, staff it, you know, that kind of thing. So so we elected, the school is obviously before I got here, but elected to go co-ed, somewhat begrudgingly, but I think it's been good overall for the school. So
Yeah, more students. So
yeah, yeah, and I think it humanizes the place, from what I understand. You know, it's you know, you talk to the old guys who come back, and you know, it was a pretty austere and kind of a brutal place in certain respects. So I think that it has humanized the endeavor a little bit.
Did it, when it was an all boys school, did it almost serve as like a minor seminary or no?
Well, for some, yeah, for some it did, but most of the kids who chose to go here were from
Okay.
they were from elite families, you know, so they were looking to get placed into the Ivies and, you know, do all that sort of track. So it was less of a minor seminary and more of a kind of finishing school for, what do they call it? There's a term for it, like the lace Irish, or there's a term for like upper class Irish families. I forget the name off the top of my head, but so it was largely that, you know, and so, but now it's, you know, it's expanded beyond all that, you know.
Okay, cool. Now, one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, and it's been a while, because this article that you wrote for 1 Peter 5, this is from 2020.
Yeah.
Well, it's not even 2 years ago, but it seems so long.
It's about a year and a half ago, I guess.
August 17th, 2020.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to show people. I printed it out. I can't read stuff on the screen. It drives me crazy.
Yeah, if I have to read seriously, I have to print it out myself.
Yeah. You know? So I mean, I highlight. It's like
notes.
One of those things where I like highlight. I just highlight the whole damn thing.
I'm flattered, Joseph. I'm flattered.
But it's a great work. I will include the link, because it's still up on 1 Peter 5. I will include the link in the show in the podcast description. It's called "Things Are Broken. We Need to Update Our Sense-Making Apparatus." I mean, I read it a long time ago, not even 2 years ago.
How does it hold up? How does it
hold
up?
I was gonna say, you know, like on Twitter, people put like, "Oh, this didn't age well," you know, or something. They'll pull up an old tweet, but this, I think, it's better today. It makes more sense today, because I think you and Steve Skocek, who used to what would you say, own, or he
was sort of the editor in chief, yeah, the owner, operator, founder, yeah, exactly.
So you guys, I mean, and I've done 3, and I've done an interview with some people twice, but Steve, I've interviewed 3 times. I love him so much.
I love him to death. He's seriously a soul brother. He really is. I love Steve. Yeah.
I really adore him. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
So I lost my train of thought. Oh, no. Here it is. So you guys were really ahead of the curve. I mean, you were kind of like the curve
Mm,
because I was thinking the same thing at the time. And
mhm.
I don't articulate things as well as you do, but, or Steve, but you condensed a lot of like what I was trying to say and
Mm,
what I was feeling about the church into this article. That's a sign of a good writer.
mm.
And it's just what I like about it and what I like about Steve. I don't know you as well. I feel like, well, I've known Steve for quite a few years, and it's weird. We've never met in person, but we've talked on the phone so much,
Yeah, yeah,
and we've done Zoom stuff. So I
yeah,
feel like I know him. I almost feel like a brother with him. But
yeah.
what attracted me to Steve is that it's kind of weird. He's kind of like a big guy. He's like a husky guy.
He's a
And
big man. I met him in person finally a
you
few
guys
weeks
went to
ago.
Jordan
Yeah, we
Peterson. I
did.
saw that.
Yeah, yeah. And he's a big man. Like I'm not a small person, but he's a big guy. And like it's just a great big bear of a man. I love him. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So I'm like I'm 6'3". I'm
Okay.
not small either,
I'm
but
tiny. Then I'm
he
relatively tiny then. So
he's intimidating just because
yeah.
he's like a forceful
Hmm.
guy, and
Hmm.
especially before I talked to him, I only kind of knew his online persona, which is
Hmm.
different from
Of
people's
course.
real reality.
Hmm.
And on Twitter, especially Twitter, Steve is pretty. He can be gruff and abrupt.
Pugnacious is the way that I describe him on Twitter. You know,
Yeah,
and he knows it, and he kind of likes it. So
Yeah, I've never found him to be rude
no,
or yeah, but he is abrupt. So
yeah.
at times, but that's cool. So, but then when I spoke to him in person,
Mhm.
he's like he's like a really vulnerable person
Yeah, yeah,
and
remarkably so.
really compassionate, really
Mhm.
caring, and
Mhm.
very thinking. So it was those two
Mhm.
things together that were cool that I really
Mhm.
liked. And one of the other big things that I liked about him, and this is why I like you so much because it's reflected in your writing, is your honesty. Because like I mean, I'm not Roman Catholic anymore, but one of the things that always frustrated me, and I wrote it down here, one of the things that always frustrated me about the Catholic space, especially for men,
Mhm.
um,
Mhm. Mhm.
that lately it's like a lot of books with like swords on the cover and like knighthood
Right, right.
and manly, which is
Yeah.
cool. That's cool because that
Mhm.
attracts a segment of the Catholic community that really like men that haven't really been reached out to.
That's
And
right.
it's something they can relate to. But then you also have, I have a person in mind, but you also have like the Catholic eggheads who are
Mhm.
like, oh, you're having this question or you're having this difficulty with the church. Let me quote something from the Summa Theologica,
Right.
which is
Yeah,
like
yeah, yeah.
that there's these two extremes. So I think you as well, you have a very masculine point of view, but I think it's also compassionate and caring to where people are right now. And that's what Steve did. And I
Mhm.
think Steve got dumped on a lot
Oh,
for
yeah.
being that, for like being a wuss or being
Mhm.
a cry. I've seen this stuff on Twitter, being a
Mhm.
crybaby and all this stuff. And I'm like, what a bunch of jerks.
Yeah.
Because here's a guy, because I've been in the same place, is it's like really having a lot of difficulty with the church and the difficulty he was having and I was having, and what you expressed in your article isn't made up. It's real. And why are people giving someone like him, a difficult time for expressing something that it's not made up? It's not like he's paranoid. It's something that's actually going on in the church. Sorry for that.
No, no, I think there are a couple of things going on there. I think that there's real fear. I sort of sometimes refer to this as Tradistan, but you're sort of talking about the folks, especially online, who are very, very, assertively
Suck it up.
traditional.
Suck
Yeah,
it up, buttercup.
right. And I think that there's there's the real concern that if somebody like Steve breaks, right, that somehow they're worried that they might break too. And so I think and therefore, as Steve himself is fond of pointing out, and I think he's correct, that, if the whole thing is predicated on fear, then you're not, there's an inauthenticity at the core of it, that frankly, is counter to the gospel on some very fundamental level. That the online trad folk, I think have to be reminded, that the gospel is the good news. So it's important for us to recognize like what the good news is. If the good news is merely dour, suck it upism, then you're missing something absolutely essential. And so in my own head, I'm an imaginative person. I teach English and literature and poetry. In my own head, I have to go back. Well, what was it exactly that allowed Peter, for instance, to not Paul, I'll do Paul in a minute, but allowed somebody like Peter to make his way to Rome, and change the world? I mean,
Yeah.
like what would that have been? I mean, it couldn't have been because he was a scholar. It couldn't have been because he was the manliest of man. It could not have been what it was about, because you had Roman legions, and you had Rome had got the sort of the hypermasculine thing down, right? I'm talking about the pagan Romans. And so what would it have been? Well, it must have been something that you could have experienced by being in the room with him. Right, that there's this sort of magnanimity of soul that you just know is not natural, right? That this man has seen something and been witness something that has transformed him so much that he leaves his small little world of a fishing village in Palestine and comes to the center of the universe, right? The center of the known world, and wants to witness to this person who died. I mean, when you start really getting into the real, like, how did that actually work? It's not like these people could just log on and like check out Twitter and look at somebody's webpage or whatever. Like, it had to be on that real human to human level. And what is attractive about that? And so I oftentimes wonder, when I'm looking at, especially, sort of tradish stuff online, is like, what exactly is attractive about this? And I think we run the risk of losing that there has to be something transformative and attractive about it, not dour. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. I don't know if that even comes naturally to me. I think that's in part why I'm going here, because it doesn't necessarily come naturally to me.
No, I want to talk about the traditional or traddy stuff, but
good. Wherever you want.
Yeah, I'm just going to take. I can't get to all this, but I'll try. I don't want to read the whole article online because I want people to read it. But I just want to quote. I love quoting people because this is a quotable article. I love quotable articles because you can read a couple of sentences and go, yes, that's where I was. A quote: "A deep and painful problem is that Catholicism in its current form does not speak in any meaningful way to us, nor especially to our children." Unquote. Quote: "Sadly, the church does not seem to be operating in any meaningful way for me, a middle-aged Gen Xer," I'm there, "with a wife, a few kids, and a receding hairline. We are in a strange pattern of pretending a kind of collective lie agreed upon." Wow. So I'm reading this stuff. I was like, wow, this guy is really, this is where my head is right now, and where my head's been a long time. I mean, just to state that there's problems in the church, I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall, because sometimes I feel like I can't even get people to admit that.
Why do you think that there's this sort of barrier to just admitting that? I mean, what's your sense of that? Because I get the exact same experience.
I think it's cult-like. I get like I have like a period of obsessions in my life, especially where I get like obsessed with like local, like San Francisco history. I was like obsessed with the Haight-Ashbury, then I was obsessed with Jack London and
Mhm.
different characters here. And then I got obsessed with Jonestown. So I got
Yes.
and the People's Temple, which really got going here in San Francisco. And
Which is amazingly misunderstood in popular culture, by the way. But anyway.
And I started thinking a lot about cults and the way cults operate. And I started reading a lot about the People's Temple and the people that were there. Actually, what really got me interested is I remember when I was at Berkeley, and a group of us, especially after we graduated, would get together sometimes and just to talk. And a young lady came with a friend of mine, and it was during that, what the heck was that called? Heaven's Gate. Do you remember
Oh yeah,
that?
I remember that. Yeah,
It was
they,
that
they wore like sweatsuits and like black beanie hats or something. I remember this. Yeah. I remember this.
It was a comet
That's right.
cult.
That's right. Yeah,
They
yeah.
all committed suicide. And we were sitting around, I was saying, there's something about California that always has these strange cults, that
Yeah.
the Manson family and People's Temple. And this young lady that was there, she was very insulted. And she said, well, my family was in Guyana, a lot of them, and they killed themselves and or were murdered. And she said, they died for a righteous cause. And I was like, oh, okay. I mean, be quiet. And sometimes I kind of feel that mentality in Catholicism where it's you just hold up the institution and the cult no matter what. And you just don't say that anything's going wrong. Uh, you,
Because in order to, it's almost sort of like talking in public about family stuff.
Well, it
Right.
starts bringing the institution down because I remember one of the survivors of Jonestown, she had broken away and she'd stayed here in San Francisco, but when they fled to Guyana, her husband and the son went. And when she came out and started talking about all the abuse, the house of cards started to fall. So it's kind of like I think people have that fear, and I think that's what attracts people to tradiism is that it's safe. People don't talk in tradiism so much about the church, the problem.
Ironically, right? Ironically, since it has such a sort of a high conception of what ecclesiology is, right? And that this is what the church claims about itself, and so there's a both an attraction to this sort of everything's hyper clear, on paper, but they don't talk about it so they're talking about it in terms of its abstracted ideal self, but they don't talk about the actual particular realities of church with a capital C.
Yeah, I think there's a fear that if people start criticizing the church, that it's all going to come toppling down.
Yeah, I mean, I think I see that fear all the time.
But then how do you have reform? How do you have accountability if you don't? What do you do?
Well, okay, so this is an interesting question. So yet, Joseph, just prior to our arrival on the scene, as it were, we have this very famous Second Vatican Council, which was all about reform, right? And in certain respects, I mean, we grew up in a church in which that was, all the rage, at least talk about reform. And yet, I think both you and I have a similar experience insofar as whatever was being passed off as reform seems to have been, how shall I put this charitably, ill-conceived or ill-executed, that it didn't do what you would think a reform would do, right? And so in other words, think about like personal finances, right? Say your personal finances are a mess, or you have an overly simplistic method of family accounting, and so you're a little bit of a mess. And so the point of reform is to bring in certain innovations, maybe an online checkbook, like whatever, like certain innovations, so that you can have a better accounting of, to run the ship better. Well, all of the proposed alterations, and I'm not talking about the documents of Vatican II, I'm not talking about doctrine stuff, we can do that later on. I'm just talking about practically, it doesn't seem to have worked. Either because it was the wrong plan, or it was ill executed, or whatever, right? I mean, we can play those games all day long, but it doesn't seem to have worked. It was either not enough or it was the wrong thing. And so the church that you and I were adults in, has never been compelling.
Yeah. Can I say something about cults again too?
God, please. Yeah.
Yeah, I think sometimes even if people do recognize, even if it's just personally abuse,
Mm-hmm.
or let's say shortcomings in a cult, they
Mm-hmm.
believe that they still believe that there's a loftier purpose to that group that outweighs the evil. Because I've had this conversation with priests, Catholic priests that know there's like serious problems in the church, that they feel like if I say something, I will be persecuted, my faculties will be taken away, or I'll be laicized. And they say that the good that I am doing as a priest outweighs me coming out and having my vocation stolen away from me. So, and I don't want to say that that's cult-like thinking, but in a sense, it's kind of like they're psychologically figuring it out and saying, I'm doing good, so I just need to keep doing good, and I'm not going to say anything about this stuff that's going on, although I really want to, and it's eating my gut out.
Mm-hmm. So there's a sort of a sense of a kind of a hostage. It's hostage talking. Yeah. And look, this is the problem, with canon law for priests in particular. They're not wrong, right? That if they do have certain rights as a priest, let's say, but not many. And the bishop, the local ordinary, has absolute power, really effectively. Fine, we can talk in theoretically that, well, the truth is important, and the Pope, you can appeal to the Pope and all that kind of stuff. But practically speaking, they are effectively omnipotent, have an omnipotent power over a priest. And so they're not wrong about that. And that's a problem. I personally think that that's a real problem. And I worry about anybody who is, has discerned a vocation to the priesthood, because I believe that's real. I believe in the priesthood. I believe in, the mark of the Holy Spirit and at ordination and all of that. But then the other part of me knows that they are submitting themselves to a group of men, particular men, who don't always have their best interest in mind. And that's just so demonstrably true. And fine, I'm probably going to get, rolled in the comments about this, because they'll say that I'm selling out or whatnot, but it's demonstrably true. I know too many stories. I know too many young men who have, I used to be so happy about those friends and acquaintances of mine who made it through seminary, right? And they got to become a priest. I was like, oh, thank heavens, Jim gets to, he made it through. He didn't get killed in seminary. And so I used to be very happy for my Jim friends, but then I've got other friends who got eaten up in the maw of corrupt seminaries. And that's real. And it's not, that's not me being, I'm not making stuff up. I have just too many actual personal friends who've essentially gotten destroyed in the seminary. and slimed with, being, having psychological problems and all that sort of stuff. Meanwhile, the reason why they have any kind of problems or depression or anxiety is because they were abused in seminary, literally and metaphorically.
That's how cults operate too.
Right. And so
they fear and abuse.
Right. And because it keeps people in line, because you keep saying, see that thing over there, that's the goal, that's the mission. Don't look down here so much, where like people are kind of getting eaten up a little bit, and don't worry about that. Those are distractions from the ultimate thing. And like, look, Joseph, I'm a Christian, and I believe in the supernatural, and I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, and I believe in the ultimate mission and all those sorts of things. But you can see, as soon as I admit that stuff out loud, I'm capturable, I'm compromisable, I'm vulnerable. And so therefore, how can you trust the vulnerability that you need, both in your personal spiritual life, but also in your public vocation? How can you develop that sense of proper vulnerability that is essential for the Christian life, and protect yourself at the same time?
I couldn't do it anymore. I couldn't, because I felt like for a long time I had covered up my own abuse.
Right.
Part of it had to do with my commitment to the traditional movement.
Right.
Because I could get to this now, because you talk about it here. You say,
yeah, go ahead.
Solve the orthodoxy plan, and you solve the abuse crisis. Unmask the wolves. Hey, I was there. I was totally there. Yeah. So I know what you're talking about. And you talk about, where did you talk about it too? Did you talk about priests in cassocks? I think you did.
I did, yeah.
Yeah. So
well, that was an important watershed moment for me personally, when I was able to disambiguate the outward trappings of traditional Orthodox faith with the particulars. Because I used to think that the hippie priests were the bad guys and the cassock priests were the good guys, and that because it simplified things. And if I saw a cassock, fine. Well, that's not true.
But that's still the talking points everywhere. Yeah. So, if do you know how many times, because they don't know my story, and I've complained about a lot of this gay activism in the priesthood, and they go, well, go to the TLM, go to a Latin mass. They don't know my history. And I'm like, I first went to the Latin mass 23 years ago.
It's a long time ago, man. That was, yeah.
Yeah, my conversion was really fast. It was like Paul. So I came back to the church. I hated everything in San Francisco with the Novus Ordo mass. And somebody told me to go to the Latin mass, and I became a true believer. Right. I was like, this is the true church. And what do you do after you get out of gay porn in San Francisco? You go move across the country to Pennsylvania to work with these TLM priests. Right. And then my eyes were just wide open.
You're like, oh, wait a second. Yeah.
But even then, I would not say anything about the TLM, because I outweighed it. I said, well, the TLM world, I think, is really the only salvation for Roman Catholicism. So I didn't talk about the bullshit that was going on.
Right.
There. Right. So I was covering up my own abuse, which is really sick.
Well, yeah, it is. But I can, if you'll allow it, I can see sort of the mental processes going on. It's like, look, for me, Catholicism represents salvation, and is, right. I mean, it is, right. And so, and the most real sort of version of that is the folks that take it the most serious, and those folks are the TLM people. They're not trying to and so I can see the sort of the mental processes. So then you go into that space and you say, okay, there's still some problems there, but at least they're not, at least they're orthodox in terms of their theology, and on paper, like, this is what they want. Like, we're all human, we're all fallible. You play that game, right? And then you start to just ask the question, well, then, like, well, no, maybe they're just using it for a cover too. And so then what do you, right? So you're in this awful situation, right? You just said out loud that I'm now covering up for another group of abusers.
And the TLM world, and I've tried to make this point, unless you go to the SSPX, which I've done that as well, they have lots of problems.
Mhm.
They're still under the same rotten bishops. And you wrote this here. You wrote, quote, even good bishops
Good. Yeah.
had acted with a breadth of malfeasance that was staggering to behold. I could no longer make sense of the world. You were talking about the abuse cover up
Yep.
and that even good bishops, and I
Mhm.
hit that spot too, where I'm
Mhm.
like, oh, these guys are okay. Usually
Mhm.
the guys that tolerate the TLM,
Right.
not
Right.
necessarily promoted, but tolerated.
Right. 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 And again, that's sort of part of that sort of over, look, the thing that I don't fault the trads for is that we all do this, right? Wherever we find ourselves, we're looking for ways to sort of simplify the world in a kind of manageable frame. It's what we do. It's what human, think about all the stuff that's in your line of sight right now. There's millions of things that you can pay attention to. Well, you can't pay attention to everything, so we look for scripts to pay attention to, right? I mean, to pay, and so we have to shrink the world into something that is more manageable. And so I don't fault people for that process. I think that's what we do as human beings. But what I fault people for is to pretend that is everything. Like everything that I've sort of highlighted in this little frame is everything that exists, and it's clearly not true. That you have to leave space in your frame to account for something that you don't know, for instance, or you might not know, or a detail or a particular or whatever it is. And I just see so little evidence of that. And it's frustrating as a an adult human being who tries to be as sort of sensitive and true as I can.
I wonder what you think about this too, because maybe I have kind of a weird perspective because I considered like the urban gay male environment very much cult-like. Cults usually draw people that are at a loose end. A lot of times they've been traumatized. They're questioning reality. They don't know who they are. A lot of times they have very strained family relations, especially when young men go towards homosexuality, especially with their fathers.
Of
They've
course.
had a lot of weak or abusive role models. And when I when I look back later at my draw to traddyism, whatever you want to
Mhm.
call it, and what drew a lot, because it draws a lot of men and it draws a lot of young men.
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, especially that had been raised Catholic, because you see a lot of like Gen Xers in trad. So they were raised in the Novus Ordo. I think a lot of them, a lot of times, have been traumatized in the the post Vatican II church. They haven't had good role models and priests.
So
They've
what,
been
what
very
what is the
they,
what is the
they've
connection you're making between that? Because I agree with that. What is the connection you're making with that and sort of the urban gay lifestyle frame?
I think people are they're looking for community.
Uh,
They're looking, and because in the gay world you have a very set of dogmas that
right,
everybody follows. Right now
right,
it's especially the born gay one,
right. Of
but
course.
it's very community centered and you stick together like we did
Uh,
even through the AIDS crisis, and people stuck to it and said,
right.
this is real, this is right, this is where I belong,
Mhm,
even
mhm.
though it seemed to be collapsing and just sort of it just seemed to be fading into dust. And then I'm being overly melodramatic, but
No,
I
sorry.
think in the TLM world you see that too. You have very strong male role models with the priests and the
Mhm,
families, and it draws people that have been traumatized a lot of times, and it does make you very dedicated to it once you find that place. Because when you're a lost boy and you go to the caster, it's like, oh, man, I found a family, I found a way to think and
mhm,
to believe and live, and I found a home. And in the trad world, you find that too in a
mhm.
very strong way. And you don't, and when I left gay, I was like, I don't want to give this up. This is my identity. And you don't, especially Catholicism in the Latin sense, in the old mass, I was like, what am I going to do? Go back to the Novus Ordo? I can't do that. You know, left Catholicism altogether because I just can't deal with the rotten bishops who control this little conclave, just like they control everything else.
Well, it's interesting.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. No, it resonates with me here, and I'm going to try to, piece this out, maybe play it out a little bit, tease it out. So if I'm inarticulate, please forgive me, but I'm trying here. So it sounds to me that you've described two subgroups that exist amidst a larger sort of normie land. And so in part, there was a little bit of an exchange of one, think about these as sort of like, a Reddit group or a Tumblr group. Like you exchange one with a certain, with certain dogmas and certain sort of hierarchies and where you fit in and how you are to be and operate, how you are to live and move and have your being, right? And so located in, as you say, sort of urban San Francisco, right? And there are roles to play there and in a variety of different ways, et cetera, et cetera. And okay, so you recognize that there is a deep sort of lie at the heart of that. So you, in part, retreat to another subgroup that exists, and then within that you sort of go into this other core that sort of is very, I don't know if this sounds right to you, but the affectation is very real, because when you're 23 years ago, you enter the TLM world, you are different. I mean, you might even be weirder in that sense than you were as a gay man living in San Francisco, right? It's odder.
It was for me, it was very strange. It was a very strange world that I landed in, but it felt good.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, because at least it's oriented toward something more than the image of self, right?
It seemed very healthy. I mean, I thought the kind of typical trad family in the minivan and the women in the long skirts. I thought it was a little weird, but I mean, I got to know the people and they're
good people.
Yeah, they were my age. At that time I was 29, 30, and they had families, and they'd been burned and wounded and lost in the new church. And I was the same way. And I was like, wow, we found something rational here. But then I started,
and I wouldn't say just rational. I mean, I know what you mean. Like it makes sense, right? It's sort of it checks boxes, but I think it's probably more than that. I get the sense that it's you found a group of people who were similarly oriented toward meaning, in a way. In other words, they weren't oriented toward, bourgeois pursuits. They weren't ordered toward, whatever, sexual revolution stuff. They were oriented towards something that was more than what you could see. So that's attractive, right? I do get that. I very much get that. And so that perhaps what you have a nose for, Joseph, is that you recognize that life is not worth living unless it's oriented toward the highest good, the highest end. And so we're looking for people who are also oriented in the same way, toward the high, to the ideal. And, when you walk into a sort of a typical suburban Novus Ordo church, like you don't feel that. I mean, I was just listening to a podcast.
There's no men. It's very, very ultra feminized, really bad.
Right, and so therefore you're like, well, this is not real, right? I mean, this is a cope. But I've learned now, in the last 18 months, I would say that this is an insight that has dawned on me. That so much of what we burn our energy with is. So much of that is just sort of finding a cope to deal with the complexity that we can't manage.
That's good. And I think one of my big faults, because I have a lot of friends who are still Roman Catholic, most of my
Yeah.
Roman, I went into, when I went gay, I did this too. I go big.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
don't do
yeah, yeah.
anything halfway. I take
Right.
it to the extreme.
Hmm.
So when I got into the TLM world, here I am single, and I'm not interested in girlfriends or getting married or
Hmm.
anything.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I go big. I get to know the priests.
Sure.
That world is my world at this point because I
Hmm.
lost everything that I had in gay.
Yeah.
So I go to work for a TLM group. A lot of people can cope with the SHIT going on in Catholicism because they're like these good families. They go to mass,
Yeah.
they do their sacraments, they go home. Maybe they're friendly with the priest, but that's about it. Not me. I had to get in deep. And then when you do that, you see everything. And I saw all the corruption, all the abuse, all the manipulation, all the
Be-
gaslighting.
because
And
you had become friends with like sort of people like priests and all that whole scene.
because I wasn't just a visitor to
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yeah.
TLM, I
Yeah.
wasn't just a parishioner. I was in it. I
Yeah.
was, and then that destroyed me. And if I had just stayed aloof from all that and been like most of these people and had my kids and had my job
Mhm.
and just stuck to the liturgy, but I didn't. I
Yeah.
didn't.
Do you think it could have been any other way for you personally?
I always get. I'm an obsessive compulsive
Yeah.
person.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
When I get involved, like when I started studying Jack London, I had to know everything about him.
Mm.
That's the way I am. And when I got
Yeah.
into the TLM, I'm like, I have to know. This is my life now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's harder but I have to say, a lot of TLMers are that way. They're very saturated in the culture. And
And in that sense, I think you can understand why it's satisfying because there's just a whole kind of arcana that is part of that show. There's an infinite amount of like prayer books and devotions and saints and books. And as Steve and I always joke, you can keep reading Sacrum, 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 and it's almost infinite. So therefore, you sort of throw yourself into this whole thing, and you pretend. Sorry, but this is what I think. You pretend that is the whole universe.
and that's very cult-like, and I think
Yeah.
also it's a form of self-brainwashing because
Why? Self brainwashing. Okay. Okay.
when you feel that that's your own world, that that's your family, and this is it. When it's the church, but it's also your salvation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If I leave this group, I'm effed.
Right.
That's what I mean. I've had Catholics tell me because I've gone Russian Orthodox, I'm going to hell.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm taking people with me and I've never told anybody to leave Roman Catholicism. And
Yeah.
I've never told people to come over to Russian Orthodoxy because everybody's journey is different and I can't
Mm-hmm.
make it for you. But they tell me all that stuff that you cannot leave. You
Mm-hmm.
cannot leave. The
Yeah.
only time, oh, and I think what sometimes distinguishes a religion from a cult,
Uh-huh.
not that Catholicism at one time wasn't a religion,
No,
but
I follow. I follow. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think what distinguishes a religion as a cult is how you're treated if you leave. And
Yeah.
like when I left gay, it's like
Yeah.
you're a traitor.
Right. Right.
How can you leave? How can you say anything about us or what we're
Mm-hmm.
doing?
Mm-hmm.
You're homophobic and all this stuff.
Right. Right. Right.
And I
Right.
got the same thing out of Catholicism. Oh, you
Mm-hmm.
hate it. You hate. I don't hate Catholicism.
So I think about this a lot. And
What nastiness! I have to say that.
yeah.
Sorry,
Yeah. No, go ahead.
the nastiness from the Catholics when I left Catholicism was worse than the nastiness from the gay people when I left gay.
Wow.
Worse.
That's that's a tough thing to hear, but I totally believe it. I've been given no evidence that would suggest it would be any other way. So I could be nice about it. My attempt to be charitable about that is that they really believe, that there's no salvation outside of the Catholic Church, right? So okay, that's like the nice part that I'll say. But I don't, and this is where I'm going to get in trouble, and this is why, people will probably call me a heretic. I know too many people who genuinely love Jesus, genuinely. And I've shared that with them, in terms of fellowship and prayer and just presence, just being with them. They love my Savior. And I simply can't pretend that their love of Jesus somehow gets trumped because they're not, in the book, that marks them as a member of this thing. So again, so now you can see, I'm sure the comments will come down below the video right now, and they will say, oh, well, Kale, then just be a Protestant, and my answer to that is maybe, but I think Jesus is bigger. He's bigger. And if that makes me a bad Catholic, it makes me a bad Catholic.
I'm on board with everything you said.
Well, I know, yeah, I'm sure you, I'm sure you would be. But I mean it. I mean it, and I've spent too much time outside of the various sort of gardens of versions of Catholicism. I've spent loads of time with evangelicals. I've spent loads of time with fundamentalists. I've spent loads of time with people in Orthodoxy, and I can't. I'm sorry. I don't believe it. I don't believe that their love of Jesus somehow isn't enough. It's like, no, I don't buy it.
Well, that's what's cult-like sometimes too, is when you get into those little enclaves, you don't have interaction with other people and other. I mean, you don't even have interaction with Novus Ordo Catholics.
Right. Well, so I was just going to say, so I'm friends with Steve, and Steve has been very open and public about what he's going through. And I remember when he was first sort of privately voicing some things to me, of serious doubt. I said, well, it occurred to me, like, Steve, have you ever, like, how much, what do you, I think I said something like, well, I mean, what do you make of your Protestant friends? And he's like, Kale, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, like when you hang out with your friends who, whatever, go to the Presbyterian church or go to the mega church. He's like, Kale, what are you talking about? And then I'm like, wait, so you have never spent any time with someone who would say out loud that they love Jesus, but they don't go to the TLM. I had spent so much time out and about, it never occurred to me. And again, this is why I say in the piece, Joseph, that at best I'm not trad. I'm a pretender at best, because and now I'm recognizing this more and more. I mean, I have a much different intuitive sense of ecclesiology. In people might call that squishy. People might, but it's just true.
That's really interesting, because I think I wrote about this a little bit in my book too, is that there was a weird sort of mind game stuff going on. I mean, early on in the TLM, is that when I started going to the TLM, the fraternity hadn't really grown so large that they could have their own parishes, like in terms of a building. A lot of times the TLM was like a guest at a Novus Ordo parish. So it was very odd. It was kind of like, I don't know, it's weird. It's kind of like it's kind of like I imagine like people in the Dark Ages, if they were like living in Rome and they could like see the remnants of this past civilization, but they were like living in the ruins. So that's right. That's kind of like how we were. We were kind of like, the Catholic Church was once grand one time because the church that we were in, but it had just, and then there was weird stuff in that church. They had like the big full immersion baptism fonts and stuff. So it was very strange. And then when I still stuck around. So then when the fraternity had gotten larger and they'd shifted to their own parish, it was much more bunker-like, because I mean, that's where you were.
because you could fortify the building. You could, you could make it like a bunker. That's right. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a real, it became even more entrenched, I guess you could say, in a way. You talked about the Uncle Ted affair nearly did me in. Now, this was 2018,
Yeah.
and I was Catholic in name only.
Okay.
I was still going to Sunday Mass, but it was tough.
Yeah.
And then I just want to hear how it was for you, because I think that was a watershed moment.
Yeah.
Well, I wish it was a watershed moment for a lot of Catholics. I think a lot of them are forgotten and moved on. So, yeah, I mean, when I had read from Vigano that Francis knew that McCarrick was a serial pedophile, a friend of mine like called me that morning and he's like, "Oh, what do you think?" I go, "Well, I think," and I've always been a naive person. I go, "I think within the week, Francis is going to have to resign." And I go, "Well, this is maybe a good sign. Maybe things are really going to get cleaned up in the church." Boy, was I wrong.
Yeah. Okay. So I get hung up on the exact same thing. And, I seem to have these vague memories of being a child. And when somebody did something wrong, they had to pay for it. And I just, we want to call that naive. I don't know, but I knew, like, for instance, when I was at school and I did something stupid, I got in trouble and I had to pay for it. I had to miss recess. I had to go to detention, like whatever was the thing, right? Whatever stupid thing it may have been. And what astounds me, and I think that this is something that is certainly larger than the Catholic Church. I think this is true really of all of our, so-called elites and whatnot, is that there seems to be this ability to never have to say you're sorry. There seems to be this reality in which you never have to pay for your crimes, and when McCarrick, when all that was exposed, that there was corruption in the church, I had already obviously faced. I mean, in the wake of Boston and all of that, and and the joke of the Dallas Charter and all of that. I was prepared for all that stuff, right? I mean, but the fact that not only was he able to get away with it, but he was able to flourish. And then when a different pope becomes pope, like, he gets sort of rehabilitated, like, it's all good. And I'm like, my goodness, like, people have, I just, it's still, look, it still really gets under my skin that these people are allowed to abuse, what I still consider, Holy Mother Church, that they're allowed to besmirch her and profit off of her good name, and then turn around and look at people like me as the enemy, as I'm too rigid, or I'm these things, and it's disgusting. And so I don't know if I've ever actually recovered from the McCarrick thing, Joseph.
Good. That means you have a conscience. Yeah.
Because the fact that he's still alive, not that I want him to be executed, please don't, that's not what I'm saying, but the fact that there's no justice, he's just cooling his jet somewhere, and he'll never have to say anything publicly. It astounds me. And then not only him, but all the 50, 100, 200 men who selected him and brought him into the ranks and allowed him to flourish. They're still in power.
All the enablers.
Every one of them.
The last time I went to a Roman Catholic Mass was, it was a while ago, it was way over a year ago. I could not stomach listening to the name of Francis. In the
Eucharistic prayer. Yeah.
Just couldn't. I just said, I can't sit here. I can't pretend to be okay with the pedophile enabler.
Well,
can't do it. Just can't. I as a survivor, I can't do it. And just as somebody with a conscience, I can't do it. So,
I I would be lying to you if I said I didn't flinch at least once every time I go to mass. And then part of me, like, I get mad at myself about that. Like, okay, oh, come on, but then I'm like, but then the other part of me is like, but it's true. It's, and so, I mean, what does it mean? I mean, gosh, I don't know what it means, Joseph. I don't know what it means. I mean,
He's the vicar of Christ. That's
I
where
know,
I
and I
couldn't,
have
I
to call him
can't,
the Holy Father, and
I can't wrap my head around that. And see, some of us had to face that when we had to call our abusers father. And it's like, this is a father.
right. And what's hard for me, and I think it was hard for you too, is that I have a good father. I know your father's passed away, and my father's still alive. Like I have a good father.
Yeah.
And
My father was good. It's complicated.
yeah, I feel that. Yeah, I get it. But at least, like I have good models of fatherhood in my life, and I like that. That's a struggle. It's a struggle for me. And look, and I am a father, right? And so I'm trying my best to be a good father, and understanding that I missed the mark, and have my missteps and whatnot. But I mean, it's tough. It's like, even that word, like that word's a sacred word, and we already have to deal with the fact that that word is trashed in pop culture.
Gotta earn it.
And you're right, but then also to have it sort of be used as cover for malfeasance and disgusting behavior is a tough one to swallow. It's a tough one to swallow.
I think and I think it's in Catholicism too, because people have been abused, not just physically or sexually, but I think psychologically within the system.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a lot of times they equate abuse with love or caring. I wrote about this in my book because there's a weird kind of what's the word for it? There's a weird kind of psychology, weird kind of headspace in especially the gay male community, where a lot of times the bondage fetishism, a lot of times it mimics Christian ritual, like the St. Andrew cross or stuff like that. Or the flagellation of the saints or Christ. There's this, I didn't see it at the time because I was raised hippie folk Jesus Catholic. So when I saw it in the gay community, I thought it was something like that originated there. I thought, I didn't know there was it's like a Christian, like a simulacrum of Christian ritual and torture and martyrdom and all this stuff. So, and then when I got into the TLM, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of sick. But I think people are confused, and I think they confuse. Where I saw it is like people, when they addressed me, they said, well, you have to be a martyr for the faith. You have to stay in the church. And it's like, it's almost like you have to be abused. And that's what essentially staying in the Roman Catholic Church meant for me. It was just meant abuse. And I was like, I don't want to do that. I don't see that as love. But I don't know. There's a weird thing in Roman Catholicism right now where I think it equates that. And then recently some people started saying that, well, the Catholic Church is so under attack and it's so corrupt and it's been so infiltrated, is because it's the true church. And, the devil has really focused all his attention on that. And I was like, okay, I can kind of buy that to a degree. But then if you kind of follow that reasoning, it's kind of like, well, the more pedophiles and the more abuse and the more corruption in the Catholic Church, the holier it is. I can't do that because being in the church was driving me crazy. And I need to be fed. I need to have some food. I need to have health, spiritual health in my life. And I'm not finding it. You see where it's kind of sick?
Well, because it travels on the same circuit, right? I mean, what is it? Philip Reef, sociologist, a psychologist, talks about death work. And death work is that which apes the form and the style of a holy work, right? But it's sort of it's a deliberate kind of twist and inversion that it looks like the thing that it's actually mocking. And so I get the whole BDSM, iconography, the sort of this torture iconography that's taken from, in certain senses, taken from the martyrology. When I could see how that could get co-opted and get really twisted. Like I'm from Louisiana, and I'm sure you heard about that story a couple of years back of the priest who had hired two prostitutes to have sex and film it on the altar of the church down in South Louisiana. And, and part of me, like my initial reaction was like, oh my God, like that's crazy. Like, what the hell? And then I'm thinking like, well, if the devil's real, Joe, then of course he wants to mock the most important things, and so he's going to ape those things to get the kind of maximal hit of the perversion.
Do you see what I'm saying about the masochism sometimes in some traditional Catholics?
Well, I mean,
where it's like the more they abuse me.
Yeah, follow Steve's Twitter feed, and every time he says something, it's like, well, we get the church we deserve, and, we don't deserve anything, and, we should just accept it. And it's like, man, you make a slight little twist and a slight little turn, and you sound like you're like in some sort of master-slave sex dynamic. I mean, you really do, and yet people do not want to face that. They do not want to see that. And for me, I don't buy it. I think it's sick, actually.
But I've seen it in priests, and I've seen it in TLM priests where there's a lot of fear.
Yes, very in control, very in control. I'm not gonna I know, I do. You can feel. For me, I'm a very sort of sensitive, intuitive person. Like I can feel it when I walk in.
I have not talked to a priest in the last few years who likes his bishop. They all think they're SOBs. And they'll throw them under the bus the first chance they get. Mm-hmm. And I haven't met any priests that are that happy with their religious order or their superiors. They have the same attitude. They don't care about us and they don't care about me, but they stay. And it's kind of like, walk the hell away. I've even met priests that have been semi-kicked out of the church.
Yeah.
And their faculties have been removed, but they haven't been laicized. And they want to go back. I'm like, what the?
Right.
Why would you want to go back? That's like going back to this horrible relationship with a guy.
Right. And like, I'm asking myself the question, that can't be of God. I'm like, really, like, take all hardcore ecclesiology and put it on the side. Take all of those sort of philosophical and theological issues and just put them on the side just for a second, and I'm not a squish head, but I mean, like, seriously, how can that be of God? How can God be telling me, to go back into the maw of the monster? Like, how can that be of God?
It's not. And lay people that I think, like you talked about coping and staying in the church, use that word cope, is that I think a lot of people, again, they don't scratch the surface because they'll say, well, find a good priest, find good priests. They're out there. Yeah. I know there are good priests out there, and I've talked to them. And I've had conversations with priests that I thought I still admire them, but I admire them in a different way. And I was like, they're coping, they're doing okay. And then I've talked to them, and I think some priests will talk to me and be honest because I've been so honest, and they're very unhappy. I don't think people realize how low the morale is among the Catholic priesthood right now. And
I agree.
How they're suffering right now, because I've talked to them. They're not happy. And I worry about them psychologically because I think they're trying to hold it together, because especially ones that are more public or more, what do you call it, more famous or whatever. They try to uphold that image that, we're on board. Not everything's okay, but I'm managing, and they're not.
So I have a sort of a public persona, right? I mean, I live where I work. So I live and work at a boarding school. And so I know a little bit, though I don't have like a uniform that I get dressed, I always think of like, and actually, I've always kind of wanted to ask you this question. I have a deep-seated mistrust of professions that require a uniform, not because I don't understand the need for the uniform on some level, but what does that do to you psychologically when you dress up for a living? And I've always wanted to ask you this in terms of the gay world that you grew up in. There's a similar kind of persona wearing that goes on in that, and maybe that's another way in which these two things sort of track together. It's like there's this affected persona that is projected, and then there's this real thing underneath the uniform that I think is a potentially dark but important place to unpack the psychology of all of this. But so I'm Mr. Zelden, right? And the students will see me, at breakfast in the morning, they'll see me at lunch in the middle of the day, and they'll see me at dinner and on the athletic fields because I coach and I do all these sorts of things. And I'm like Mr. Zelden, and I and I go throughout my day as I'm Mr. Zelden. And I have found that the best way to be Mr. Zelden is just to be real. And yet the temptation to sort of put on a show is also very real. And so how do you kind of keep yourself in check and remain sort of authentically you, is perhaps something that people don't think about enough. And this is maybe why the online virtual space is so toxic. It's because it's sort of like this weird space where you can sort of unleash all this stuff that you bottle up all day long. Or so I don't know. I'm sort of rambling here, but I think there's something to this. And so when I think of the priesthood, and my friends who are priests, there must just be a tremendous pressure to sort of play the role and not be the person. Because apparently, if you be the person, sorry, be grammatically messy here, in order to be the person, you could run afoul of your superiors.
And I've met, and I shouldn't say but I've met and I know priests that have had psychological issues.
Yeah.
And it's I don't know, I think a lot of Catholics don't think of priests sometimes as a real person.
Yeah. No, no, I agree. They're characters. They're characters.
Right. And it's like, yeah, they have psychological issues, and sometimes and I've met them, and I think they really came to the forefront when they couldn't hold that facade anymore. I'm thinking of one in particular where he was interesting. God, I love him. He always walked, I thought, a fine line between, remaining part of the firm, remaining a good worker, a good priest, and obedient to his boss, the bishop, and also, tactfully, I think, pointing out things that in the institution needed work. But even that, I think, was seen as disloyal. And there's a weird kind of set of not punishments, but consequences that befall priests like that. And I think he just started getting alienated. And I think I could see it start to play on him psychologically, where he became very paranoid.
Paranoid to be exposed, or paranoid how so?
Paranoid because he wasn't a cheerleader for the bishop or the church. I think he certainly wasn't somebody that was pointing out all the faults in the church.
Right.
He was just somebody, I think, that looked at things with clearer eyes. But that was not good. And that's like a cult when they see people that, those people are starting to doubt. and we need to put pressure on them
Mm-hmm.
to fall back more into line. And some people will just fall back into line and say, "Ooh, ooh," but
Yeah.
then some people that still have their own mind, that are real men. And this guy was he wasn't a bruiser, but he
Mm-hmm.
had a sort of masculine core about him. He wasn't
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
thief.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it I could see it in Father. It started to make him super paranoid because he's kind of like, oh, people didn't like that. Somebody got up and walked out during my homily. I go, so what? Good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it started, or somebody, this is where it starts a lot of times. And he said, somebody wrote to the chancery, somebody wrote to the
Mm.
bishop. And then bishops don't like to do anything.
No.
And they don't like to get, angry letters.
Yeah.
They don't like that stuff,
Right. Right.
And
So,
then,
no matter, right, even, true or not, right, true or false, that they don't want to hear that.
and priests don't want to get a call from the chancery.
No, no.
Oh my gosh, it's like, oh
Yeah.
boy, the chances, bishop secretary is calling. This is not good.
Right.
And they get paranoid, and they start questioning about, because I would be like, he said, oh, was that homily okay? I said, that's fine, Father.
Mm-hmm.
And I could just see it until he broke.
Mm-hmm.
They broke him
Mm-hmm.
because he wouldn't fall into line.
That's heartbreaking,
isn't it? And I think
it
happens.
is.
I think it happens a lot.
Yeah, I do too.
And I think because I've talked to priests, and a lot of priests just say, I'm going to be quiet because I am doing good. I'm not doing a clown mass. I am doing good. So I'm going to be quiet. This isn't the hill I'm going to die on. The gay one's not, the priest with the rainbow stole.
Right.
I'm not going to die on that hill.
Right. Well, because we see what happens when.
But once you compromise, then what?
No, I know. So what's going through my head right now is sort of, Rod and Peterson, and Solzhenitsyn, the whole, live not by lies thing. And, I really believe that. I really believe that. And I
look at the hatred for Roger.
Oh, it's amazing. It's
from
amazing.
Catholics.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I can't tell you how many times Catholics.
I'm like, Catholics learn something from this guy.
Yeah, they'll pull me aside like, Kale, like, when are you going to tell Rod he's got to become Catholic again? I'm like, dude, get out of my face. Get out of my face. Seriously. Like, I love Rod and I respect Rod, and he's a brave man who tells the truth, and that, that's his lodestar. He's not about protecting the brand. He's not about protecting the shield. Like I would never ever violate my love and esteem for Rod by saying something dumb and disrespectful like that to Rod. I don't understand it at all. But the mantra is, live not by lies. And the thing that I love, what Peterson talks about so much in this regard, he's like, look, and of course they're both getting this from Solzhenitsyn, right? So neither of them are trying to say that this is the things that Peterson says that I think is so important, is that every time you lie, every time you agree to go along with a lie, you're building the anti-kingdom. And it doesn't matter. Like there are no carve outs for that. Right. So every time you go along with the lie, you are lying, and you're bringing, this is my words, right? You're bringing devils into the garden. You're bringing serpents into the garden every time you either agree to a lie, or you participate in the lie, or you look the other way in the midst of a lie. And, these are very convicting things for me, because I'm by nature not a confrontational person. I'm by nature a very, like I told you already, I'm very sensitive, and I'm very in tune with how people are feeling. I do not like to tick people off. But now, I'm nearing 50, and I can really see the way that stuff brings evil into the world. And I'm not being hyperbolic. I really, really mean it. I think that when you engage in that kind of activity, you're not bringing about the kingdom. You're bringing about the anti-kingdom. And I'm still trad enough, that I believe in that stuff. I believe in hell, and I believe in heaven, and I believe that in addition, perhaps, to a place that some of us choose to go upon death, I believe that people create hell here. And I'm just having a harder time pretending now, in a way that maybe when I was 25 and, in a very serious, Orthodox Catholic, in a sort of a Catholic triumphalist, I probably would have been more apt to lie for the brand. And I can't now.
Yeah, I did too. One of the things that Rod Dreher wrote that really hit me hard when he was leaving the Catholic Church was he talked about this episode where he rushed to kiss the hand of Cardinal Law. Back at that. And then and when I read that, I was like, because there was a time where Cardinal Schornborn was in San Francisco, and I ran up to kiss his hand, and he's turned very full gay, very.
Yeah, no, I know. I mean, yeah.
And I'm like, ugh, I know what I know what that feels like. That's like you kiss. Ugh, yeah.
I don't. It's so funny, Joseph, that you talk about that. I've never been comfortable with that kind of stuff. Even like I remember, so I was in Rome for the semester in January, February, March, and April of 1993. And so John Paul II was still the Pope. And he was older then, and it definitely, he's still very capable and he's still very physical, but you could tell he was really ailing at that point. And John Paul II was and still remains in certain ways a real hero of mine. And I remember being really skeeved out at the way people would treat him like like Elvis or something, like a holy Elvis. And it just, and I would say that in part, the reason why that stuff skeeves me out is that in my reversion, so I, as a high school student, I thought I was smarter than everybody on the planet. So I left the church, and in spectacular fashion with my family and all that kind of stuff, right? And so my religion was really like music. I loved to go see shows and did the whole thing. And I was I went to a Jane's Addiction show in New Orleans, and I love that band. I still love the band. The music's great. It's a little, whatever. Anyway, I remember I'm there and I was totally sober, right? I hadn't been drinking, no drugs, nothing like that. But because I really loved this band. I mean, I was really into it. We're all like, you're in the pit and you're all kind of like throbbing up and down. And I don't know, man, something hit me like a ton of bricks. I'm looking to my left and I'm looking to my right. And I'm like, this guy, Perry Farrell, this guy could get us to do anything right now.
Yeah.
And this thought just came into my head, and I said, and I'm not at all convinced that he would use that well.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've always been very deeply skeptical of worshiping men, even to the point where I don't, what the hardest thing for me to do, is on Good Friday at the veneration of the cross, is to go up and kiss the crucifix. And it's not because I believe in Jesus. I love Jesus. It's just that it's very, just that, I don't know, I'm very uncomfortable with that kind of public display. And so whenever I would see all the pious nuns and pious men and women and children flock after John Paul II to try to kiss his ring, it has never sat well with me. So I think I've been.
That's because you had a good father.
Yeah.
And you weren't looking for a hero to worship. And me, no, I was.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. That makes sense. Because I could always hug my dad in public. And he loved me. I knew he loved me. Even when we were like, in high school, and we were, he was always the one that, because when I sort of left the church, he was the reasonable one that I could still talk to. My mom was beside herself, but Dad was very sort of steady and solid. Anyway, so
boys that have a good father, I think, don't grow up with all these deficiencies and all these longings
Mm,
that
mm,
you see in a lot of people.
mm.
And
Yeah,
Steve, I hate to talk behind people's back, but I'm not. Steve, had issues with his own
yeah,
dad, and he could see why he fell into the Legionnaires of Christ
yeah,
with this strong male ethos
yeah,
and leadership there. And a lot of guys fall into the military, gay and
yeah,
straight, who
yeah. No, it's
they
true.
long for that. And I did. And there's still cults around priests. I'll use the example in bishops in my own diocese,
Mhm.
Bishop Corleone.
Yeah, yeah,
They
yeah.
call him the Lionheart and everything. There's sort of
Mhm.
this mythos around him. And because,
He's kind of a handsome fellow too. He's sort of this white shock of white hair. I mean, he's sort of
yeah,
there's a regal quality to him that I could see people really getting into.
he's very short,
Oh,
but
interesting. I didn't know that. That's funny.
yeah,
That's
he
funny.
is. I would
Yeah.
say, yeah, he's much shorter than me. But I mean, because I live here and I've been on the
Mhm.
front lines, I know the
Mhm.
reality. And
Yeah, yeah,
he's a pipsqueak.
yeah, yeah,
So like most bishops, and all
yeah,
show, no go. So,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but the tradies love him, and a lot of Catholics love him. He's the Lionheart, and I'm like, you built a whole mythos, and it's so easy to do.
I mean,
So
I've had, you go to these conferences and you sort of sit around a table with 12 seats, and, I've sat at enough of these dinners with bishops. I don't, there's just no there.
you're not odd. You're not
No,
odd.
I'm just, it's like, I remember, well, I shouldn't say names, but, um, a prominent Northeast bishop of the biggest city in the country. I just remember sitting I was at the table with him. He's sort of doing this sort of jocular, aw shucks, grab you by the shoulder and big, shake your hand as if this is supposed to sort of like somehow, oh, he's great. Like, no, no, stop. Like, I'm a man. Like, that was my reaction. Is like,
Yeah.
stop it. Treat me like a man because I'm a man. And if you're not interested in that, I got no time for you. You know?
You're secure in your manhood, and a lot of priests aren't, because when they're in the seminary, and I've had priests tell me this, they're broken down.
Yeah.
They're broken down. That kind of masculine core in a guy, they break that down. They break it down. So you leave that institution
Warp.
less than when you went in.
And maybe worse, you're warped.
Yeah.
You're warped by it. Which is oftentimes a diminishment. That's right. That's right.
And
But altered.
I think a lot of it too has to do with celibacy. I really
Mhm.
do. I
Mhm.
think if in a lot of ways, and this is coming from a gay guy, I think a lot
Yeah.
of ways a man is not complete without a woman, and a woman is not complete without a man. I mean, it's a sexist,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
they complement each other. And I think not that because I've met monks that are great
Mhm.
and well-rounded and fulfilled and not not fractured. They're whole men,
Yeah.
but there's a way to do that.
But it's clearly an exception, right? I mean, it's clearly it's the exception, not the rule in practice. I
Yeah.
mean, you and I would, I think we could scroll through our mental Rolodex of people we know.
And in
You know, we,
orthodoxy, I've just seen, I'm like, wow, these are more men that I'm more comfortable with.
Mhm. Mhm.
Seem more fulfilled, happy, and well adjusted,
Mhm.
much more grounded than I have found. Um, Priests, I don't know. There's a fearful atmosphere in the Catholic priesthood. It's not healthy.
Well,
And
and if you're calling the piece, I have what might have been seen as a kind of throwaway line, but I said something about that the priesthood selects for a certain type of person, and I mean that sort of in this sort of almost evolution, sort of social evolutionary way. That you know we know that, let's say that there are 10 men who enter the seminary in a given year at a large diocese. We know that a couple of those will be selected to, one or two will be selected to go to the NAC, right? And then, and then a group of them will be from that group, then those get selected up to become, part of the chancery, and then from those groups select up to become bishops, right? So there's a clear selection process that goes on.
a
And
grooming process.
correct. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. So my question for bishops is always like, how did you get to become a bishop? There's got to be a story.
And I've talked to priests that have been in the seminaries with bishops, and they say that selection process happened very early on.
Right away.
Where those are, where the ones that are picked out for the hierarchy, and there must be, I don't know, they must be very susceptible to grooming. They're very good at it, or I don't know, or they're good at like absorbing direction, but I don't know, maybe they're also good at faking it.
Well, you have to be double, right? I mean, you have to be doubled. You have to, you're laughing, but but I'm serious. I think you have to be very comfortable with a kind of duality, this wide gulf between what is perceived and what is real. And so, if you become comfortable living a double life, which is exacerbated by the fact that you dress up for a living, then you really do run the risk of, I have found that when people live this kind of double life, that you are capable of such monstrosity as a human being, because you have cordoned off certain core things from your consciousness that you have to, just in order to sort of negotiate the day and to be sort of politically successful. That gap is precisely that allows you to act in some of the most monstrous ways that we see. And so I don't know how you fix that.
I think they compromise themselves, and I think in a sense they sell their soul. I remember when a friend of mine had some friends down at St. John's in Camarillo, down in LA, the seminary there. And he invited me. I don't know how it worked. I think he was kind of thinking about a vocation, and I think they really wanted him. And so he said, let's go and spend the day. I said, I think I would like that. I'd like to kind of see what it's like. I've heard a lot about it. So we spent the day going to the courses and eating lunch with them. And I remember one of the seminarians, he's like, well, I'm like a submarine. I'm like staying low right now. But he says, when I'm ordained, I'm going to surface.
Bullshit. It's bullshit. It's total bullshit.
Yeah. So and I was like, ooh, this is not good psychologically for you.
No, you're lying. You're lying. You're living lies.
Yeah, he's had to compromise so much. And I remember when I was at Berkeley and things were getting kind of Marxist then, and I was kind of that way. And I remember there were certain things about the teachers taught that I had to regurgitate just to get a good grade. But they were about stupid things. Like I was studying art, and it was Impressionism and French, whatever. It wasn't a big deal. But if you have to like compromise on these fundamental truths on this stuff, that's not good. That's bad.
Yeah, so I was in graduate school in English, and in the mid '90s, and at the time, deconstruction and post-structuralism and Foucault and Derrida and all this stuff was all the rage. Yep. And so I realized that if I wanted to be a college professor, which is really what I wanted to do, I really wanted to be a college professor. That if I was going to do that, I was going to have to spend the next 7, 8, 10, 15 years of my life actively lying in order to get a job interview, in order to land a job, in order to publish so that I could get tenure. And I remember at some point saying like, oh yeah, I'll just, fine, I'll tell them whatever they want to hear. And then when I get tenure, then, and I just remember like, that's bullshit. I'm not going to do that. Like, I can't even turn in some stupid 8-page, 10-page paper on some crap I don't believe. What makes you think I'm going to, so I took a terminal MA. I mean, I had an opportunity to go and I could have gone on, but I took a terminal MA because I was like, even though I think I would be a great college professor and like it's not worth the lie. It's not.
This is interesting because it ties into your paper. Because I think you talked about looking at outside sources and outside voices. And I think like somebody like Jordan Peterson or Gad Saad or people that were academics, I think they've shown how intolerable it is to play the game. And I think it's not that those guys were hiding, because I think Jordan Peterson was always pretty honest about what he thought and what he believed. But
the toll's real. The toll's real. you know, that it wears on you. If you're, even if you elect not to lie and you're going to tell the truth, they're going to come for you. I mean, I follow both of those guys pretty closely, and you think of somebody like Gad Sad, and you can see, it wears on him, man. It really wears on that guy. And oftentimes he sort of plays the role of the happy warrior, but you can clearly see that it is just rubbing him down.
He says, and now he says he wants to leave academia, and
Sure.
Jordan Peterson has. So
yeah. But those are those are unicorn conditions, that if you can become an academic that can support yourself outside of an institution, that's a great thing. Look, I'm pro. I mean, I hope God bless them. But I don't know how you do that.
No, I think, because I've had a conversation with the priest, and I think a lot of priests are going to have to come to that realization too.
Wow.
Am I honest, like you said, with like Rod? Am I honest? Do I live by a lie? What do I do? Do I leave or do I stay? And if you stay, you have to toe the line.
Yeah. So it's I mean, I suppose on some sense, right? It's the sort of the pinch of incense test. What's a little pinch of incense to the god of Baal or whatever, and it's like, you can't. You can't. Like, you're not allowed that.
This is the conversation I had with some good speakers, clerics, who were speaking at the LA Rec at the same time that James Martin was. And, I'd gone to James Martin's talks, and I said, what he is teaching is evil. It's not confusing. It's not bending truth. It's not being compassionate. It's not accompanying. I don't know how you want to spin it. It's evil. It's evil.
Right,
it's grooming. So I went to these priests and I said, okay, you're fairly big name. You're lending credence to this horror show.
It's a farce. It's a farce.
When you're there, and Bishop Barron was one of them. And I said, are you not going to appear there? Because you really need to take a stand and not do it. They did. They appeared.
And now he's a bishop. And and I look, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Bishop Barron. Intellectually, I really like a lot of the Word on Fire stuff. I'm a fan, but I am, and I know that also it ticks the trads off when I say stuff like that. But I get exactly what you're talking about, Joseph. It's you're just giving cover to the enemy, and I don't mean I'm talking about the devil. You're giving cover to evil by participating in that, and it's I've been to it as well, and it's absolutely disgusting.
He's giving cachet, he's giving legitimacy, he's giving an imprimatur, whether it's not official or not. And then
de facto.
And that what that does to me, people like me who've lived it, then I don't have a lot of credibility, because people are like, well, Bishop Barron.
Well, and this is exactly right. I mean, I don't make a living going after Pope Francis, but this is precisely all that stuff that he talks about on the airplanes. That every one of us who've gotten in front of a group of kids and tried to toe the line on orthodoxy in terms of sexuality and faith in the human person and marriage and all that sort of stuff, just get completely undercut by some stupid off the cuff, who am I to judge thing? And it's like, man, not only is it incredibly puerile and dumb, but it's just incredibly destructive to people like me who, feel compelled to tell the truth.
The ship has sailed on the gay issue in the church. I can't. It's the good ship Lollipop is gone.
Do you think it'll become codified? I'm just curious. I don't disagree with you. I'm just, do you think that there's going to be moves to actually change the catechism?
I don't know. I mean, it is. I've always had this argument with Catholics too, because they always say, well, the Catholic catechism is very clear about homosexuality. And I go, well, that doesn't really matter. It's like what happens on the pastoral level.
Totally. Yeah. That's what
For
I
me,
mean. But we were sort of talking about this with the whole trad thing, and that there's this sort of theoretical thing that's amazing and awesome and without blemish, and then there's the lived. We joke about the lived reality. But the lived reality of on the ground level church, and it's a basket case.
and it's the same thing with Archbishop Corleone, because he'll
Mm.
make a lot of noise, and all the Catholic media, blogosphere will pick it up. Oh, he said this very
Yeah,
strong statement
yeah.
about sex marriage and
Mm.
the sanctity of the family,
Right,
but he is allowing his priests to perform, they're illicit, but to perform same-sex marriages
right,
in his diocese.
right,
So it doesn't matter. And all the gay people know that, because I
right.
talk to them. Oh,
Yeah,
we have priests that'll marry us,
of course. Yeah.
and it's bizarre. It's bizarre.
Mm.
There's
Mm.
such a disconnect
Mm.
between the Catholic Church and reality. It's not, and it's nowhere, I think, more stark than on the gay issue. I mean,
Yeah. And
the
and the cl-
abortion is always kind of preoccupies everybody's mind, but you're not going to find a Catholic priest or bishop that's going to
right,
stand up there
right,
and talk and say how great abortion is.
right.
But there's a whole bunch of them say how great gay sex is.
Of course, right. And probably for a variety of different and sometimes even overlapping issues
It's
or
because
reasons.
the presbyterate, there's a large
Right.
gay,
This is right. Right. It's exactly right. And
and it hits home.
but the disconnect, and it's almost like the closer you are to the center of the power in the church, the more delusional you are.
Yeah. And I feel sorry. I mean, I'm abortion is a very serious issue. It's a life
Mhm.
and death issue.
Mhm.
Catholics have gotten mad at me when I try to compare that to the gay issue. And I feel sorry for people that I don't know, they can't see equivalent, but there's a death of the soul and a death of the body too.
Right.
And
Right.
I see people that are being, deceived outwardly. And it's not just deceived in the shadows, or
Mhm.
like some
Mhm.
priests, like when I was gay in the 90s, it wasn't
Mhm.
so much outward. Like I had priests sit with me and say, oh, it's okay that you're gay and you were
Understand.
born gay,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you really need to settle down
Mhm.
with one guy. And this was during
Mhm.
the age of
Sure.
AIDS. And I
Sure.
had one priest even say, I know somebody here at the parish that you could meet, and so
Amazing. Amazing.
yeah. So I mean, but now all that stuff goes out in the open. So people are being deceived in the
Well,
church openly. So if I subscribe to all this and I sit in mass in the pew
mhm.
and I
Mhm.
just be quiet about it, well, I'm complicit.
Right. And the thing to me that the complicity is real. That's sort of that lie agreed upon bit that we were talking about earlier. And what is striking to me about it all is sort of this long standing, decades long soul murder that
That's it.
that gets completely swept under the rug. And that's what pains me. One of the things I'm apt to talk about when me and Rod are doing our thing is, I like to talk about it. We don't know what we're for, and we call, as a culture, we simply we don't know what we're for. And the great lie, that I see perpetuated, both in gay frames and in straight frames, is that we seem to think that what we're for is abuse. That we're what we're I'm made, to get off and get somebody else off. Like that's sort of that's what it is, to get your kicks. And either, people get your kicks on you or you get your kicks on them. But it's sort of this weird frame of use and abuse that stands in the space where purpose is supposed to be. and and then to have it ate by a lie, right? So again, it's the lie that's made to kind of look like the truth, but it's not really the truth. So much damage gets done that is almost unentangable. Like you can't, like, how do you ever recover from that? You know, how do you ever, you know, where's the mercy in that? By not allowing, you know, by not telling people the truth, um, and just being saying, oh yeah, you know, what you've really been put on the planet for is to sort of be of some use in a twisted way to somebody else. Like that's what you're for, you know. And I think we're scared of. I think we're. I think we spend a lot of time kind of avoiding that kind of deep existential reality, that deep existential truth. You know, that we're made for more than, you know, our pleasures. We're made for more than pleasure. You know, that there's something much more profound than that. And that's why I think, you know, when I look at my models, it's those people, living and dead, who have understood the nature of sacrifice, sacrificing even those things that are most hard, you know, to give up, you know, as models of renunciation. And instead we have a presbyterate that seems to be obsessed with doing everything they can to not have to preach a gospel of renunciation. You know, that's, you know, you look at what the German Synod is doing. You know, this is not a gospel of renunciation. This is a gospel of you know, of luxuriation or something like that. You know, it's just like, you know, if it, you know, what was the joke we used to make in the 90s? You know, if it feels good, do it. It's like, that's the gospel. You know, it's got to be something more than that. It's got to be something substantial, not that empty.
I think those guys, along with a lot of the Jesuits that are into all this LGBT activism, they're trying to validate their own existence. So I think they're conflicted. They're conflicted. Yeah. They, you know, they belong to a church that on paper doesn't agree with their life. It's sick.
Yeah.
It's very sick. That's what it's sad, because you're like a really interesting person. I've spent way too much time, you know, taking up too much of your time. And, you know, we just talk about all this institutional stuff, and we don't talk about our Lord. We don't talk about any spiritual. And what's so cool is when I have Orthodox priests on here, I've talked to OCA priests and but ROCOR priests. We talk about spiritual matters.
Yeah.
But in the Catholic Church, it's just, especially in the Catholic blogosphere, there's no discussion of spiritual matters. It's all institutional. It's all scandal. It's all corruption.
And I think on some level that's because the church has made itself the focal point. And in other words, it's hard to talk about anything else because the church has insinuated itself into the center and the core in a way that is, I think, what you're getting at is pretty darn unhealthy.
Yeah. Where's the salvation of souls? Where is it?
Yeah.
I don't see Roman Catholicism saving souls. I don't see it. Yeah. Where is it? Where is it? I wanted to, I know I've kept you too long. I put a star next to this. I honestly don't remember the last time I've been proud of my church, proud of my faith, proud of my fathers. I can't remember the last time I've been able to say, I'm proud to be Catholic. Oof.
Forgot that I wrote that.
You did.
I mean, I know I did. As soon as like, yeah, but it's true. I mean, you know, I'm not going to walk that back.
Oof.
I can't.
Have you changed? Because that's about a year and a half ago.
No, I feel like I've kind of gotten more complicated.
Really?
Yeah. You know, Yeah, I don't know. I certainly haven't gotten better. If that's sorry. I don't think I've gotten better. You know, I feel a little bit more bold to be okay with that. I think I think a lot of that confession.
But that's like being in a loveless marriage.
Mm, mm. Yeah, it's a dark place to be. You know,
At,
um,
I think if I hadn't been a survivor,
mm,
I think I could have coped with that. I think I
mm,
could have coped with it. But because it's so deeply personal with me, and because I know a lot of survivors, I couldn't live in a loveless marriage anymore. I did it for 20 years.
right, right. Yeah, because you have your limits, right? I mean, there's only
And you
so
know
much.
what you end up losing love? You end up losing love for the person you're in that relationship with. And for me, it wasn't the church, it was Jesus.
Mm,
And I was beginning to resent him
mm,
because I
mm.
felt like he's keeping me in this really bad Stockholm, this really
Yeah.
bad. It's just really bad. I can't do it anymore.
Well, maybe that's how I've coped. Um, is that I do believe, and this is what I said, earlier in this conversation, that I think that Jesus is bigger than this stuff. And I know that that puts me on precarious ground, you know, but I feel strongly that Jesus is bigger than, Ted McCarrick. Jesus is bigger than the Pope. Jesus is bigger than um, the sort of the banal middle management that seems to, what did Steve say the other day, the cacistocracy, that runs things. I believe that Jesus is bigger than all that. I don't know why. Again, you're asking me as a Catholic, right? I don't know why these are the people that have apparently been chosen, to run this church. I don't get it. I don't get it. But I do believe in Jesus, and maybe I can say that because I'm American and I could be a Protestant, just as Protestant as the next person. I don't know. But it's, I have not yet had Jesus obscured by the evil machinations of chestless men yet.
I couldn't. Can I? I want to let you go because I took up
No,
too much time. Can I ask you a
yeah,
really
go ahead.
difficult question?
Yeah.
I've phrased it in terms of, but I'm going to phrase it in a different way for you because you're
Mhm,
a teacher.
mhm,
I have phrased it in terms of a doctor, a good doctor who works at a hospital, but the hospital has serious problems, sometimes resulting in death of patients. Now, that doctor has to make some sort of decision at some point. Okay, am I going to stay at this hospital? I am doing
yeah,
good here. I'm a good doctor. I
right.
perform good surgeries. I've saved people's lives, but I'm part of this super corrupt institution. Now let's look at a school.
Mhm,
This is going to be difficult because it's going to,
mhm,
I think, draw a harder line or a harder parallel line with the Catholic Church. What
yeah.
if you're at a church, at a school,
Uh-huh,
the principal's covering up sex abuse?
yeah.
People are being sexually abused. People are being groomed. People are being lied to. Children are being deceived, specifically children. But I'm a good teacher at this school
Mhm,
and I am helping kids. Do you stay? I couldn't. I'd have
yeah.
to,
Right.
I couldn't
Right.
stomach it. Knowing that maybe in the next door, in the next room, some teacher is grooming a kid and telling him, hey, it's okay. You were born
Right.
gay. It's
Right.
okay. There's nothing wrong with this.
Yeah, no, that's a powerful and convicting question, Joseph. I mean, so my dodge, I guess. Yeah, no, my dodge, I guess, is, how wide out do I extend, when I work at a school, I'm working at a very sort of specifically circumscribed place. It's got 300, 500 students, maybe 1,000, but there's 50 teachers. There's such and such buildings, and so in my head, I'm sitting there thinking like, well, if this particular place is corrupt like that, well, no, of course I can't be party to that. The problem in my mind as I'm wrestling with all these things is, what is the difference if my particular satellite is not corrupt, but the mothership is? I mean, that's where I'm struggling.
But let's just say that that's a self-contained universe, that the principal is the Pope.
Yeah. No, I can't do it.
You leave.
I guess, yeah.
And that's what that was the realization that I came to, because, and I sat with a bishop once. I said, I'm seeing abuse. I'm seeing grooming. It's not underage. It's not minors, but it's vulnerable people that really need somebody to protect them. And I can't sit here and be a part of it anymore. And I can't. So I have to leave. I have to leave because there's abuse taking place right now. But I don't fault people for not leaving Roman Catholicism, but they have to. I don't know. Did you give me an answer? No, you did. You said you'd have to leave. You said you'd have to leave.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the mental calculus, that you're sort of, you're weighing is, the good that I feel like I'm doing, is it totally obscured or washed over or swallowed or enveloped by all the bad? I mean, I think that's the sort of the back and forth. And then really you're asking the question, like, what does it mean to be a member of a church? Like, what is it like? Just what does that mean? I don't know. I
think when a lot of people start leaving the Catholic Church, I think that's when, especially people like you who are rational and who are well thought out, and just say, or people like Rod Dreher, although he's been marginalized by Catholics as a bellyacre and whatever, but they intellectually came to that point, but they couldn't do it anymore, and I did too. Well, me, it was more emotional. It wasn't intellectual. It's very emotional for me.
Those things are very intertwined, though. I think they're way more intertwined than we afford.
Yeah, and then people say that, and people have said to me, well, there's problems in Orthodoxy, Russian Orthodoxy too. Yes, there are, but it's less centrally. It's not as focused on a central nexus like it is with Rome and the Vatican. That's what I was getting at with, the claims that the church makes for itself make it a much more difficult thing to hold your nose. Right. It's hard to say that you're sort of a member of a local church in quite the same way. If you belong to like a little Protestant storefront church, at the edge of the strip mall, like that's your church, like that's it. There it is. It doesn't claim for itself anything more than that, whereas Rome does radically make those kind of claims, and I think that's been the process of self-definition going back, to the middle of the 19th century. And probably even earlier than that. Actually, I know it's probably earlier than that too. But the way that it has sort of defined itself, certainly since Vatican I, makes it much more difficult for somebody like me to sort of carry on the way that I'm carrying on right now, which is in this sort of dubious, ambiguous, uncomfortable space. I kept you long enough. I want to encourage people to read Kale's. There was a lot more that I wanted to. I could sit here for hours with you.
That's fine.
But I think you've done a lot, because I've said this to dads, fathers, how to relate better to your children, especially your sons. And I've said, be vulnerable, because I'm sure you've had difficulties in your life. And I know my dad did, but he never shared it with me. And if
Yeah.
I would have known the all of the really traumatic things that happened with him as a kid, it would have made a lot more sense to me. Probably not as a boy, because I wasn't introspective. Everything was so immediate and here
Right.
and now. And I couldn't look. But be vulnerable with your sons, because you're a human being as well. And that's why I appreciate men like you and
Mm,
Steve Skocek, because you're being vulnerable, because
mm.
men aren't don't share their feelings in general. And I think they don't generally feel, or they don't share their feelings when they're having difficulty. And I think that helps people a lot, because I think in the Catholic space, there's a lot of, like I said, that suck up buttercup stuff.
Mhm,
Be a man, be a warrior, be a
mhm,
fighter, which is cool.
mhm.
But
We need that too, obviously.
you need both, but you also
Yeah,
need men that are honest
yeah.
and say, not everything is as it seems. So I
I
don't
would,
know.
I would say this. Maybe the difference between me and Steve is I think we both set as a high mark our sort of our virtue that we need to be about truth. We need to orient ourselves to truth, and we need to be honest. But for me, I think that maybe a difference is that if you sort of look into the whole like attachment theory, that I grew up in a very loving home. I would be categorized as what you would categorize me as a low anxiety attachment person. I have a deep sense of security that I have no memories otherwise being, right, because of my parents, and because of that, I think it's easier for me to be vulnerable because I don't have to feel like I'm constantly about to get um, uh, eaten by the dragon. And so, I think that's in part what I try. It informs my teaching, when I'm with my students. I realized very early on in my career as a teacher that um, being fake was a bad deal. And therefore I try to be real with my students. I try to be vulnerable with them, and I try to learn with them, and I know that I know stuff, and I know them a lot smarter than they are and more educated. I'm not trying to pretend otherwise, but at the same time, I need for them to understand that I'm a human being, and otherwise it's sort of this weird sort of incarnate lie that I'm passing on to them, and that's bad.
You
That's not
don't,
real.
when you teach, you're not performing.
Right. Well,
And,
right,
and
right.
a lot of priests nowadays, especially, I'm going down a rabbit hole again. I'm sorry,
Yeah,
but
that's a
a lot of priests uh, with the Novus Order facing the congregation, it's a performance,
yeah, yeah.
and a lot of times they're looking for love from the congregation. They're looking to be popular because they're not. This sounds like stupid Robert Bly men's movement
Yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
but they're
yeah,
not secure in their
yeah,
manhood.
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
men that are secure in their manhood are honest and truthful
Mm,
about themselves and the world around them. And
yeah.
Jordan Peterson's a perfect example. He's kind of
Totally.
that, he has that like Kermit the Frog voice, and he's
Yeah,
very
yeah,
academic and
yeah,
he's very
yeah.
intellectual.
Mhm.
But to me, he's very masculine because
Oh man, amazing.
he's very secure, he's very fatherly. And
Yeah,
that's why so many young men have like gravitated
totally.
towards
Mhm.
him,
Yeah.
because they didn't have that. They didn't grow up with that.
Yeah, serious vulnerable dad energy, right? It's real. And when you're in the room, that's the first time I'd seen him was last month, and he just exudes that. I mean, what was so refreshing to me about that is that he was exactly how I thought he was going to be.
Mm.
Vulnerable, authoritative, honest, compassionate. Like it was it's quite something to pull off. You can't pull that off if you're faking. You know what I mean? It's like you can. So he was just, I was just impressed. I was genuinely impressed. And I'm not a worshiper. I mean, he's a man. It's fine. But he's a good one. And we need those.
He's an iconic figure when there aren't many of them.
Yeah.
And I think if the Catholic Church is going to survive, they don't need priests like James Martin, who is like
Yeah.
the gay. He's like the mother with a gay son.
Hmm.
You know, we need priests like oh God, we are just talking about him. the Canadian teacher we were just talking
Oh,
about.
Jordan Peterson. Yeah,
We
yeah,
need
yeah,
we
yeah,
need
yeah, yeah.
we need more priests like him. So
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and maybe look, maybe there'll be a model. I think that he's, much to the chagrin of sort of church leaders. Peterson is pretty popular, and I think that they're being forced to pay attention to why that might be so. And
young,
the why that might be so is because he's authentic.
especially with young men.
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So, yeah.
Hey, thank you. God bless you. I kept you. Maybe we could talk again
I love it.
because
No, this is great. You ask me really important questions that I sometimes would probably rather not chew on, but it's exactly the kind of things that I'm working on in my background and in my person as I'm just walking around life. These are the crisis things that I think about all the time. And so everything that I wrote in that article, even though it's a year and a half, 18 months, it's still very real to me.
aged very well.
Yeah, well,
And
thank
I
you.
really encourage people. And I hope you write more too.
Oh, well, that's on my
Like you
that's
have
on
time.
my self-improvement schedule here is that I know I've got all this stuff that I need to write. And that's what I'm
Like you
going to
have
do.
time.
So
Do you have
yeah.
summers off?
Yeah, actually, finally, because I was an administrator for a decade and I'm now no longer an administrator. So I have more time. And this is
God,
why I did it. So
God bless
all
you,
right,
Dale.
all right. Take care, Joseph. Bye.
Bless you.